was in AA before I even started drinking. What? Welcome to the Joyous Expansion Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Dupree, scouring the globe to bring you stories of courage, passion, and resilience. If I could sum up this podcast into one word, I would use empathy. Now let's get inspired. Welcome to the Joyous Expansion Podcast. I am your host once again, Brett Dupree, here to drop some spiritual and personal development knowledge on you. I have a special one for you today, talking to a man who lost it all twice and kept on going. His name is Richard Kaufman, and it is a very inspiring story and one that I'm very happy to have on my podcast. One of the stories that I kind of hope to have when I think of my podcast, but most of my guests are that way, and this is just another amazing guest to talk about his time with drug addiction. I mean, this guy was in AA before I started drinking. Yeah, and now he's helping people with that. So it's really cool to listen talking to him, but as you know, this is the beginning of my podcast where I talk about my life. Because if I can't talk about my life, if I can't be vulnerable, how can I expect my guests to be vulnerable as well? This week has been an interesting one for me. I hit this point of not wanting to do anything. It sometimes happens when I start my life changes. It's probably been part of my cycle for the last years. I start something and then I have a weekend where I don't want to do anything, and then I eat and eat and eat, and I have to start all over again. So I happen to do that. It's a very interesting thing when that happens, that feeling of I want to do nothing. And it's not so much I want to do nothing, it's just not much sounds good to do. And everything feels annoying, is the best I can explain it. And it hit me. I guess that's probably some form of depression of some kind. And it's just, I didn't want to do anything. And I picked up a D&D series on what used to be dorky, but now college humor. It's pretty good. It's entertaining. It helped during that time. And so I kind of slipped off my workout, even though today I did go for a walk for 40 minutes or 30 minutes, which was good. I don't know if I mentioned on my podcast, my left knee was hurting. And so today was the first time I actually went for a walk to test the knee, and so far, so good. My story of my knee is I walked on it a bunch for 3 days, and I just was, for various reasons, unable to walk a lot before. I think it was raining a lot, and I just didn't work out, and thus I didn't really continue to work out, and then I worked out a bunch. My legs were sore, and then I took Monday off after walking a lot for 3 days, and then Tuesday I went for my walk because it was a nice day, and then my left knee was hurting, and then I just paid it no mind because I thought it would feel better. But when I woke up the next day, my knee hurt so much. In fact, when I tried to sleep that night, I could barely sleep because my knee hurt so much. And then for 2.5 months practically, for about 2.5 months, I had to walk with a cane because my left knee was hurting, and it was just so much pain. And I did not like it. And there was a part of me wondering if this is just going to be my life now, especially the dull pain of that the older people were explaining to me is some arthritic pain, and that does not sound fun. I even had the doctor look at my knee, and the only thing they could find was arthritis. They couldn't find any blood clots or anything dangerous or anything torn apart. But I think I did pull my hamstring as well. I don't know how, but I think I just did. And so, but the last 2 weeks I've been able to walk without a cane. It's still been trying to stretch it out and trying to walk normal because I've just been walking with hunched over for 2 months. So getting my muscles to walk like normal is been fun. But today is the first time I did something where I walked specifically for a certain amount of time, and I didn't have to take a break, which is good because my back didn't hurt, which made me feel great. And it doesn't seem like I re-aggravated the knee. So tomorrow I plan on going for a walk again. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I am happy with that. One of the problems with my current sadness that I go through is a lot of the times I'm happier than I ever was in the past. Because I am a decently happy person, and I could be happy with my sadness because I don't feel as alone. I don't feel as sad. I don't feel as never felt hopeless, but I don't feel as just down on myself. But there's just something about it that I get to the point where I don't want to do anything, but I also kind of enjoy not doing anything, And so it's almost, I think, almost a dark side of spirituality, this ideal where I can justify it, but feel good about it because I feel mostly good about myself. I love myself. And there's a lot of things I've accomplished during this time, which is still working towards the Lightworker Toastmasters. We hit 35 members, which is super awesome. And we're going to hit a couple more new members. So we're going to have 37 to maybe even 40 by the end of the year, which is awesome. It's almost getting to the point where it's too many members, but some people are slipping away, and that's what happens. So we constantly need more members, but super cool. The Lightworkers Expo that I helped putting on or had the idea, even though someone's taken over the reins mostly, and that's fine by me because I'm not a good day-to-day person. The thing would have failed if I would have done that. Probably wouldn't even happen, to be honest. If this person didn't, Lorelei is her name, she does this for a living. If she didn't take over, I don't think it would have happened, to be honest. Working on that, I'm not doing nothing is the issue. I'm still going to work. I'm doing a decent job. I could do better, but I'm not doing bad. But when I come home, I just don't want to do anything. And that happened a couple of days, and I tend to eat more than I should. Even though today I did eat what I thought of dinner, but as I was feeling that sadness that is there and really going into that sadness, as I noticed it, and because I think that's what it's like in life, is not to avoid sadness. And I noticed because when I avoid sadness, that's when I eat, and that's also when I don't go as far as I should, and I don't do exactly what I should do. And I should notice that the block there, and it's most likely something along the lines of this deep sadness that I feel from my youth. And as I work towards myself more and more, it's almost like more and more of this layers, and it just makes me wonder, is this just an unending sadness that is within me? That just little boy who just wants to be loved and never really felt love. And will that part always be there? But the thing is I can't avoid it, because if I avoid it, that just causes more issues. But I don't want to wallow in it. And as my friend Andy Dooley likes to say, I don't want to cheat on my future with my past. But at the same time, the sadness is there in my unconscious, because I'm not consciously thinking these sad thoughts, but I'm just noticing that feeling. And so notice that's feeling, because I'm like, why am I doing this? Why I just kept on asking my questions. And I think that's why I don't like journaling, to be honest. I don't like journaling because maybe I can touch on it, but it seems exhausting because I do that all day, even though it's just in my mind. And I do think there's power of putting it on paper. It's like casting a spell. That's why they call it spelling. Spelling. You get it? Because you're casting spells when you write things down. A fun coincidence of the English language. But at the same time, I think about myself all the time. And so writing it down just seems like, well, why am I doing this thing that I do all the freaking time, nonstop? Because I am so self-absorbed in that regard. And yeah, I'm not saying that is a bad thing. I think introspection is one of my strengths. It's one of my geniuses, if you will. But at the same time, it makes it sometimes difficult. But probably going to talk about this with my therapist on Friday to see what she has to say and work through it, because that's what you just have to do when you hit that shadow work, when you hit that darkness. And speaking of darkness, I am going to talk to I interviewed somebody who definitely felt the darkness, Richard Kaufman. Richard Kaufman, also known as the comeback coach, was a drug addict and a drunk until one day he was able to turn his life around, and thus wrote the book, A Hero's Journey from Darkness to Light. A veteran of the U.S. Army, and now here is my interview with Richard Kaufman. Hello, Richard, and welcome to my podcast.
Thank you. We've been talking about getting together for so long. I truly appreciate it.
I appreciate your time as well. So tell me your story. You says you suffered from depression?
I've come back from drug addiction, alcoholism, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, blindness, depression, and now I've come back to helping other people that are struggling with the same kind of issues. I help people that are dealing with any kind of addiction issues, any kind of health, fitness, or any kind of issues that are struggling getting through life, and I help people turn that page where they can start living a better life.
How did you get PTSD?
Well, actually, I was in the military. got retired out of the military. I was in for 24 years. I was actually backing up a Humvee, and instead of him hitting the brakes, he hit the gas, and he ran over the whole right side of my body and my head. It caused an ocular stroke, so I had a stroke in my left eye, and I went completely blind in my left eye. And I got post-traumatic from there, and also that's where I sustained a traumatic brain injury.
What was your life like after the brain injury?
I had to relearn a lot of stuff. My speech wasn't really affected. Like a normal person, they can read something once and they get it. I'd have to read something like 5 or 6 times just to remember. Got into deep, dark depressions. I woke up at nighttime sweating, scared. It got me into a very deep, dark state because not only at this time did I lose my vision, but I also lost my career at the same time. And that kind of sent me down to a deep, dark rabbit hole. Thank God I came out of it, but that was one of the biggest things that was dealing with the post-traumatic stress.
Oh, definitely. I know, losing your career and kind of losing a sense of purpose and meaning can happen with that.
Yeah, you know what it is because, like I said, my story has a lot of different twists and turns. But once I got back into the military, I dedicated my whole life to it. And my whole identity was being Sergeant Kaufman. And then to just have it taken away from me, I didn't have an identity. It was just taken away because anytime, even if I got somebody asked me for my ID or if I always just showed my military ID. That's who I became. And then when I got out, I didn't know who I was. And I had to find out who I was. And now it's been a 7-year journey that I'm going through, is finding out who I really am.
It must have been interesting also because it was an incident that wasn't even your fault. It had nothing, you did nothing wrong. It was another person who did that to you.
Yeah, and the thing is, it was a young kid. He was a young guy. I didn't even report him because I didn't want him to get in any trouble. That caused me a whole lot of heartache afterwards because I didn't do everything the proper way. Just to keep somebody else out of trouble, I kind of got slammed. So it was rough, but thank God I came through the other side.
Is that when you started to abuse drugs?
Oh, no. My father left when I was like 3 months old, and my mother was a nurse, and she would work all these weird hours just to try to make a living. And we moved like 10 or 12 times. And one New Year's Eve, I was about 12 years old, me and my cousins. Our parents went out for dinner, and we found Mom's liquor cabinet. After my first taste of alcohol, like when I was 12, by the age of 13, I was a full-blown alcoholic. I would just stand in front of a liquor store and pay people to go in and get me liquor. And they actually did it back then. It wasn't a big thing. So I was a full-blown alkie probably by the age of 13.
Wow. Did you just stick with alcohol?
No. What happened is I went to high school, didn't do well in high school, didn't know that at that time I had ADHD. I wasn't learning like everybody else and I was different. So I figured if I'm going to be different, I'm going to be like totally different. So I became like the class clown. I dropped out of high school in 9th grade, so I only have a 9th grade formal education. I joined the military at 17, and there I not only became an alcoholic, I found acid, and I became a drug addict and alcoholic. So by the age of 18, I was a full-blown alcoholic and drug addict.
That's pretty early to do that.
Yeah. It was an interesting ride. Go on into more into my story. I partied every day and every weekend for 2 years straight. The military decided they no longer need me, and they threw me out for being a drug addict and alcoholic. I got discharged. I got thrown out of the military at 19 years old. Came home to live with my parents. It was pretty hard to live with my parents because, for 2 years I was traveling the world, partying all over the world, and then having to come home and be in the house by 10 o'clock was kind of hard. So they threw me out of there. I got thrown out of a lot of places. I lived with my girlfriend at a time. I was working for her father, doing something, working with his business. And I moved into a crack house. That's the only place I can afford because I had like no credit. And I was making good money at this time. I was probably making back then maybe $800 to $1,000 a week. And I still only had enough money to live in a crack house. And I'm probably the only guy you're ever going to talk to that gets thrown out of a crack house for non-payment. So I actually had to live in my truck. I lived in my truck probably for almost a year. I was homeless. My mother let me back in because I told her I was going to go back to school, and she was proud of me. Little did she know I was going back to school to be a bartender. So that's not a good thing. I aced the class, though. I did great. The first job I got was New Year's Eve of 1989. A friend of mine, he was a police officer. He owned a bar here in New Jersey. He asked me if I'd bartend for him, and I said yes. Got there. The money was flowing. The liquor was flowing. Everything was going good. People were buying me drinks. I wake up about 8 hours later to a knock on the door, and it was the police department. It was him in the police department. Obviously, I robbed the place. I gave away like $2,000 worth of free drinks, and I had like $5,000 cash in my pocket. I was looking at about 5 years in prison. Hard time. He said, Rich, you're only 20 years old. I'm going to give you a break. You have to come up with the money in 24 hours, which I did because I borrowed from my mother, father, aunts, and all. He said, but only on one condition. He says you have to go to 90 meetings in 90 days in AA, and you have to sign get signed in every time. So I did probably 350, 360 meetings in a row, and I haven't had a drug or a drink since 1989. So I got sober when I turned 20. When most people are not even starting is when I quit.
I didn't have my first drink until I was 21.
Yeah, I was out. Like I said, I was 12. So I think I did more than everybody else was supposed to. Got clean and sober. I haven't had a drug or a drink since 1989.
So was AA that turned your life around?
Well, AA got me, put it this way, AA got me, there's a difference between being sober and being dry. AA got me dry, which means I just wasn't drinking. But I was still living an unsober life, which means I was just out of control. I just wasn't drinking. So the second part of my story is I rejoined the military because I felt I just had something. I didn't complete what I meant to complete, so I actually rejoined the military. Got back in, still had a lot of the troubles that I did before without the alcohol. I wasn't reliable, I wasn't teachable, I wasn't humble at all, and I just had an attitude. I moved down to South Carolina, joined the South Carolina National Guard in 1999. Got into a lot of trouble down there. I was going to be thrown out again September of 2001, the end of September 2001. One Tuesday morning, I woke up getting ready for work. My ex-girlfriend comes in. She says, Rich, you got to see this. And I went and watched the first plane hit the towers. Me being from New Jersey, I used to live maybe 10 minutes away from the towers, and we knew people that were in there. I just sat down and watched, I watched the plane hit the second tower. Something broke in me at that moment. They say God will break you, and I became a broken man. And I actually sat there, and I wept, and I cried. And I felt helpless. And I said, I prayed out loud. I said, God, if you give me a second and third chance, I want to dedicate the rest of my military career to people that we lost that day. I called my company commander, my first sergeant, and I asked for a meeting. Of course, they said yes, but they've heard it all before from me. They've heard me. I'm not going to do it again. I'm never going to miss a formation again. They've heard it all before. But they said they seen something different in me that day. And thank God they let me stay. They let me stay. They didn't throw me out. And within 2 years, I became a soldier of the year. I became a non-commissioned officer. And I never missed a drill. I've never missed a formation. I've never missed anything ever again for the rest of the 24 years in the military. So that 9/11 is what actually changed me and turned my life around.
And so you worked so hard to become Soldier of the Year, then all of a sudden that's taken away from you.
Yep, and that's when I got into that deep, dark place, and then I had to decide. You've been through so much, you've been through the drug addiction, you've been to the alcoholism, you've been through the homelessness, you've been through all this. It's just time for another comeback. So I went to the VA. I started seeing a psychologist, and I still see her today, 8 years later. Started reading every book I can on self-improvement. Started meeting with high-level influencers and, talking to them and learning. Then I just decided, what? There's got to be more people out there that are struggling with this stuff. Now I just want to dedicate my life to helping them to let him know that, you're not alone. And if I can make it through it, anybody can do it. And that's what I started doing. I wrote my book, and, and I started going on podcasts. I started to have my own Facebook Live TV show. So, and that's what my whole life is about now, is helping other people.
So I'm interested. You said you went to see a psychologist. Was there any apprehension before asking someone for help in that way?
No, because my mother was an addict, and she got clean. And she told me that she would go see, she goes to see a psychiatrist. So I was just like, well, I guess if she can do it, like, why can't I? And the funny thing is, I tell everybody and they laugh, and it's a true story. And my wife gets a kick out of it every time. My psychologist, her name is Dr. Soos, Soos. And when I came home from the VA that day, I said, honey, I went to go see a psychiatrist. And I said, her name is Dr. Seuss. And she just broke out laughing. She's like, really? I'm like, yeah. But this doctor has been amazing to me. And I don't feel any shame in seeing it, a psychiatrist or psychologist. Because it's kind of like, I'm in the health and fitness industry now. It's kind of like if a person has a broken arm, you go to a doctor. If a person has, I feel if a person has something broken in their mentality, they go for help to get it fixed.
Oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I just know in our society we have a stigma for not only asking for help, but especially getting mental help.
Well, you know what it is? It's just, I figured I'm at the bottom. I lost my career. I don't have a job. I don't have vision in my left eye. I'm dealing with all this other stuff. What's the worst that can happen? I go to her and nothing happens. So it was just like, either go all in and see what happens, or what was the worst case scenario? She was going to get mad at me or something. And I don't have, that's one thing I don't have anything, is that I don't have pride anymore. Pride is a killer, and I don't have that pride in me.
So what were the first changes you noticed in your life?
For which part?
When you started talking to psychologists and reading the personal development books.
A lot of it was every book that I read. And this is going to sound funny, but a lot of books when I first started reading, they started talking about this guy, Gary Vaynerchuk. And I would read like all different books like Robert Kiyosaki. I would read all these different self-help people. And his name would always pop up. And I started watching what he does. And I found out he was from New Jersey originally. And I found out where his father's business is. So I went down there and actually met him. And we actually talked for a good while. And I asked him, I said, what's something that I can do to really start changing my life as it is? He said, just start becoming self-aware. And when I started becoming self-aware, my whole life changed. Because once you become self-aware, you can own the world. You can master that man in the mirror. You can master the world. And I think that's the biggest thing for me, is becoming self-aware and becoming present in whatever I do.
Yes, awareness is extremely powerful.
Yes, it's a bitch sometimes, though, because that's why I wrote my book. Because when I wrote my book, it was my autobiography, but I had to go back and talk to people. And because a lot of times I was too drunk and I couldn't remember. I had to humble myself. And there's a lot of people I had to go back to apologize to and ask for forgiveness for. And that was a big thing, was just once I wrote the book, because I was on a podcast probably about maybe 2 years ago. My friend Donnie Boyven, he has a podcast called The Success Champions. And I was telling him my story, and he's like, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to go see that movie 8 Mile. And I've seen it already. And I was like, okay. He's like, I want you to watch the last 2 minutes. So I watched the last 2 minutes, and I called him back up. I'm like, all right, I've seen the movie. I'm like, I don't get it. He's like, if you put all the dirty stuff and all the grime that you've ever done out there, out into the world, there's nothing anybody can ever say about you again. What can they throw out at you that you already haven't put out? And that's why I wrote the book. Because once I did that, I became free. Like a lot of people will say, Rich, you were a drug addict. Yeah, I was a drug addict, but now I'm clean and sober. I was homeless. Now I live in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife and 3 beautiful children. Now what? So when I put it out there, I became free. And once you're free and you don't care what people think about you anymore, your life actually changes. Because then you really start becoming self-aware.
I think another beautiful part about that is that's how, in my humble opinion, how you truly help people. You don't help people by serving platitudes and memes and telling them quotes. You tell your personal story, and it's noticed that I've been to hell and back, and that's how I can help you.
Yeah, because, you see a lot of people, I notice a lot of so-called influencers, or, you see them one way when they're out, and then you see them a different way when you're at home. And me, I'm just the same goofy guy, whether I'm home, whether I'm out, if I'm on my Facebook Lives, if I'm on my podcast, I'm the same guy 24/7. If we meet, just know you're getting a hug, because that's who I am. That's the guy that I am. And there's no personality. It's just me. It's who I am. So people can relate to me, because I don't try to put up any airs, because I'm not trying to be somebody that I'm not.
So I'm interested. You went through all those things. You went from, well, hell and back. What made you actually decide to want to help people?
Well, even just during this whole time, even through my alcoholism, my drug addiction, I always had a job either at a gym, a general nutrition center, any kind of health fitness store. I've always been in the health and fitness industry. Now I've been in there 31 years. I've been helping people get healthy. I've had past clients in the NFL, Major League Baseball, WWE, former world boxing heavyweight champion. And I've always helping people get help physically. And once I started getting help, I started realizing, even like when I still go to my AA meetings. It's funny how only a drunk can help another drunk, or another addict can help another addict. So that's when I decided, hell, maybe if I put my story out there, that it will touch somebody, and they wouldn't have any hesitancy to reach out and talk to me. And that's what happened. Now I have people reaching out from all over the world, messaging me, texting me, saying, I heard your story. How do I get help? And now I'm the kind of guy that I'm just standing in the gap for somebody like that police officer stood in the gap for me 30-odd years ago. So now that's my goal, is to be able to be that guy that can stand in the gap for somebody. Because like I said, from my experience, only an addict can really talk to an addict. Just like only a military guy. Two military guys that never met can meet and just start talking and create a friendship. And 5 minutes later, they're like best friends. Same thing with addicts and alcoholics. So I wanted to be that guy that that you can relate to and can open up and talk to. And if I can get you help, I'll get you help.
Sounds very rewarding.
Yeah, it is. But it's tiring because it's free. I'm doing it all. I don't like my book that's out on Amazon. It's only 99 cents, and it costs way more than that to write it and promote it. Everything that I do is to give, because one thing that Gary taught me, I said, Gary, give me a phrase that I can take with me. And he said, you know what, Rich? He said, your legacy will always be more valuable than your currency. And that really struck a chord for me. And that's when I just decided, what is my legacy going to be? And hopefully my goal is to save 1 million lives. And that's my goal is, even if I just save one life, it changes somebody else's family's destiny.
That's beautiful.
I've lived before 9/11, I lived my first 30 years living for myself. And now after 9/11, I've spent the rest of my life living to help other people. It's kind of like the Kevin Spacey movie, Paying It Forward. That's all I'm just trying to do is just pay it forward. And I've been blessed otherwise. I've been really, really blessed. God's blessed me so much.
So what has been your favorite part in doing this then?
Just when I go on my Facebook page and people that I've talked to in the last 6 months, now they're taking vacations with their wives and their kids. Now they're getting married. Now they're starting businesses, having children, having babies. And just 6 months ago, they had a weapon in their mouth ready to blow their brains out. I think that's the best payoff I can ever see, is people just living their best lives now because I was just there to listen.
So we are coming to the end of our time together, and one thing I like to ask my interviewees, or guests, if you will, is for a 1 minute of motivation. You can imagine this as if you have a time machine and you travel back to your 8-year-old self, and you need to convey the wisdom it takes to live a happy, joy-filled life. But unfortunately, you have a minute until you're popped back into the present, or you can think of it as condensing your entire life's message into a minute. Are you ready? Let's go.
All right. So my minute would be, at this time in your life, anybody that's struggling with anything, 2 things I would tell you before you leave this podcast. Stay humble, stay teachable. If you can do those 2 things now in your life, your whole life can change within 90 days. Stay humble and stay teachable. Those would be the 2 things that I would say.
Thank you so much for coming on my podcast. Listening to your story of struggle and going beyond that is very inspiring as somebody who had everything and then had it take it away from them a second time even, and still being able to bounce back from that and actually seek for help, because a lot of people just refuse to do so. And I know I've had struggles asking for help in the past. So hearing somebody do that and then to serve other people is outstanding. So thank you for your service to this planet, and thank you for coming on my podcast.
Thank you, and I'm so blessed, and I'm so grateful, and I apologize for having to reschedule, but thank you so much for having me.
May your day be special.
All right, God bless.
And there you have it, folks. That was my interview with the Richard Kaufman, the comeback coach. And what a comeback it was. I was alive on 9/11, and that was a day that everyone who was alive then will remember. And the way it affected Richard Kaufman's life and turned it around was special to hear. But what was even more special was after he made his comeback, he had everything took away from him again. And he was able to, through humility and through his faith, be able to come back another time and get to the point where he can help other people with that. And just listening to somebody, he, again, as I said, he was an AA and alcoholic before I even started drinking. I started drinking at 21. He was an alcoholic at 20 and had to quit due to $2,000 in stealing drinks and taking the cash and all that stuff, and be able to come back from that. And honestly, I've never heard of the difference between sober and clean, and that makes a lot of sense. You can stop drinking, you can stop your bad habits, but if you don't build good habits and you still do all the things that get you into trouble, even though you don't drink and you still aren't taking your life seriously, you aren't. A lot of times when people get rid of one bad habit, if they don't replace it with something good, they tend to, well, then replace it with something also damaging, because just the saying I've heard is nature abhors a vacuum. And so if you don't feel it with positivity and something that you can strive for, you can slip back. And the thing that teaches me over and over and over again, I would have to say probably with 70% of the people I've interviewed have been not all been drug addicts, but have been people who have something about them that is hard, a very hard life early. And one of the ways they turned it around is helping people and serving others. And there's just something special about serving others. I just remember the story that I learned a long time ago. I don't know if it actually happened, but it was just one of these stories that you hear. And this one lady, she went, I don't remember, it was Gandhi or some other Buddha or enlightened person. And her child died, and probably disease or war, something like that. I know, I'm doing such a great job of telling the story. And she went up to the wise person and said, I am distraught. My son is dead. I don't know how I'm going to go on with my life. Is there something you can do for me? And then the wise man said, if you can go to a house and find someone who has suffered no loss and come back to me, I will take your pain away through magic or something like that. And so she said, thank you so much, and left and went to the first house, knocked on the door, and asked them if they've experienced loss, and their father has just died. And she's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And they hug, and she consoles, and they talk. And then she goes to the next house and learned that their children also died, and then she goes through that same thing over and over again. And she went to house and house, and each person experiencing loss, and then connecting with each one of those people. And eventually, after going to over 100 houses, and each one have experienced loss, and each one she connected, she finally returned to the wise man, and she said, have you found someone who hasn't experienced loss? She said, no, but I have found peace. Because in the service and the kindness to others and the empathy that she felt with the others, she was able to let go of her pain, or at least not let go, but move through it and recognize that there's just power in helping people. Despite what anyone says, we are stronger together, and we're stronger when we help each other. And almost every person, other than the small percent, I mean, yes, there are psychos out there. There are psychopaths. The people who aren't born that way, anybody who generally goes into a violent gang, who joins a terrorist group, most of those people are because they're in a desperate situation where they don't feel like they have another choice. But most people, if they have another choice and we truly help them and give people what they need, most of us, and then by most, I think 99%, because I don't think psychopaths are above a percentage. And honestly, most psychopaths are decent people. They're wired differently, and if the round community wants them to not murder people, they generally don't. It's only a very small percentage of people who want to harm others. So if we truly help each other, I think we can make this world a great place, and that's why I love talking to people like Richard Kaufman who makes this world better. There you have it, episode 51 of my podcast. So if you want to talk to Richard Kaufman, you can go to his website, richardkaufman.net. The link is in the show description, or you could do the Comeback Coach, Richard Kaufman. And yeah, check out that, check out his book, richardkaufman.net, and so cool. And that is episode 51 of my podcast. Wow, 51. Last week was 50. This is 51. The number just keeps on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm so happy to be able to do that. So if you want to email me for any reason, you can email me at BRE2Ts, at joyousexpansion.com. You can also check me out at Joyous Expansion, thechurchofawesome.com as well, to listen to my podcast, The Church of Awesome, and the Facebook group and all that fun stuff. I am Brett Dupree, your champion of authentic joy, catalyst of transformation of the Church of Awesome, and Joyous Expansion life coach, inviting you to follow me on Instagram at Joyous Expansion, Twitter at Joyous Expansion, and Facebook at Increase Your Joy. And of course, wishing you once again to be love, to be joy, to be awesome. Now play that jingle.
JoyousExpansion.com. JoyousExpansion.com. Come and say hello to Brett Dupree. He is an inspirational life coach, good for you and good for me. He turned my life from grey to blue, I'm sure he'll do the same for you. Get in touch and you'll see your life will change dramatically. JoyousExpansion.com. JoyousExpansion.com. Yeah.